Well, look, I should do a brief introduction. Today we're talking with a composer member, Karl Steven, who is famous for many things. Obviously, he is well known for people of a certain age, mine, as a frontman for a very well-loved group, Supergroove. But he has, in the last, how many years, been kind of transitioned into becoming this multi-award winning composer?
I guess the last 10 years it's been full time, but I did start doing music to picture even before people knew about Supergroove, really. So when I was still in high school, I did my first jingle in high school. And then worked in a recording studio and did the odd thing then too. So my career as a screen composer sort of had two starts, the real young version and then the slightly more concerted version, more recently.
Sure, when you realised you could actually charge for it or not just do it for a favour or for mates or whatever.
and I just took it a lot more seriously, and I had a much better, really what had changed is I had a much stronger love for film, but first, when I did it when I was young, I was just a musician who wanted to earn some extra money. You know what I mean?
Did you see it as was it like a viable, was it a career that you knew existed? Or
not really. I mean, not like it is now. Now I think it's perceived as a career that exists. You know what I mean? It's like there's a real live question about whether it actually is or the extent to which it is. You know what I mean?
We can talk about that in more detail.
Yeah. But no, I just saw these as gigs. You know what I mean? So it's like, someone wants you to play harmonica on this, and someone wants you to do some music for this ad, or it was sort of diversifying my things I could do to earn a crust from making music. But I was in the right place at the right time to some extent, or to a large extent. When I was young getting those jobs, it was because someone in my family was, I got the opportunity to pitch because my uncle was a young guy in an ad agency. And so the door was opening just a crack like that. And I was able to pitch on things that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to. But I certainly didn't see it as like the line of work, I guess. Or I just wanted to make music, basically.
Sure. Okay. And so when did things I know you've had lots of other, and you still do a little bit of live stuff sometimes, or is that
very occasionally?
Yeah. When did the sort of live performance work start kind of slowing down or wrapping up, or was there a clear transition where you thought this is enough, or how did you transition? Because there's about half our composer members are like people like yourselves who've been in the live sort of world and then kind of transition into some other sort of shape of career. Was there a clear line where you thought, I'm sick of this, or how did that happen?
Quite organically. It's just as the work came in. I mean, I really love working on storytelling projects, film and TV and stuff, and that is a lot more compelling to me than shaking my tuchus on stage. You know what I mean? Particularly even from a young age, that touring cycle, of just playing the same songs, that set that you wrote, maybe a few years ago, night after night after night. I don't really find that very exciting. I like to make, there's lots that's fun about it, obviously, but I find it artistically not very exciting. Maybe that's because I'm not doing it in the right way or something, but what I really do find exciting is making new things every day and finding creative solutions to problems, in storytelling and working with different sounds. And so I'm kind of wired in some way to probably be a studio musician.
You didn't see yourself playing residencies in Vegas in your 70s playing the same old songs.
No, once I'm forced onto the stage, I do kind of, enjoy it, but I don't like the crowds, and I don't like the traveling, and not liking crowds is not the best thing for you know, a thriving live music career.
It's surprisingly common, isn't it? That a lot of people who are great performers or are very introverted, and it seems to be perverse. It's like a lot of stand-up comics like are incredibly introverted people, but they go and do something that I think is just vomitingly awful and unnatural, really, to stand in front of a massive crowd of people.
Yeah, I thought about that recently, because Supergroove from time to time does reunion dates, and also this year I performed some of my Screen music live. So some of it I didn't play any instruments, but at the end of the set, so there's a string trio played some stuff.
Oh, no.
And some other musicians as well. And then at the end of the set, I thought I better get on stage at some point and, you know, yeah, just contribute. And it made me think, actually, on stage, if you don't like crowds, it's much safer feeling to be on stage than in amongst the audience. Like that's where I'm most uncomfortable, is like attending a concert, you know, and there's people everywhere, and I sort of hide by the sound desk as like a safe island where I understand what's happening. And yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I wonder what I mean, there is a sort of personality type kind of cliche for composers, and sort of hiding, and it's a solitary sort of life in many ways, isn't it? And I like that. I like people, but I also quite happy not to see people. Are you kind of in the same sort of boat?
Absolutely. I think for this sort of work, it's a combination of being happy to be by yourself for days on end, and also being quite collaborative. Paradoxically, like I'm quite a good team member. You know, like I genuinely enjoy the challenge of getting on board someone else's project and trying to find a way to sort of enhance their vision and help them out. But I prefer to do it by myself.
Yeah. Collaborate, but from a distance.
Yeah, that's right. So it works quite well. I mean, that said, I absolutely love working with other musicians. But that's these little highlight sort of moments in this great forest of isolation, you know.
Yeah, sure. I think we need to do like a Myers-Briggs test for like everybody on the membership, and just figure out, are we all the same, you know, like kind of stay. Yeah. Did you have a career like a career plan? Like did you have some sort of strategy? Was there any shape to how this all worked out?
Not really. I mean, I was pretty excited about the prospect. I mean, my father was a filmmaker, right? And so I saw him making things, and I saw his friends making things, and I was definitely intrigued by that process, and sort of had a bit of an inkling that I wanted to be involved. But as I said, I didn't have at that point that sort of love of film as an art form. It was more like I loved the process and the world, you know. But I didn't have a career plan. All I knew when I was young is I got to do music as much as possible. That was the whole name of the game. Then I sort of burnt out a bit doing bands and touring, you know, the world and what have you. And then I went to university, and I had ditched out of high school early on to go work in studios and stuff as a sound engineer. So yeah, I went to university, and that really changed a lot. So it was a huge dog leg and I eventually did a PhD.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of people, I read that, I had no idea. I looked at your bio before this, and you've got a PhD in philosophy from Cambridge, is that right?
Yeah, randomly enough.
Because how did that sort of slot into?
That's what happens when you drop out of high school. You know, anything is possible. So yeah, basically I started reading books on tour because there's so much waiting around and so much downtime and boringness. And so I started, you know, buying secondhand books and stuff and reading them. And then that became a bigger and bigger part of how I survived the touring, which, as I, you know, said, I wasn't hugely in love with. And I really liked going to university towns and playing there, and then speaking with people afterwards, because you'd get into these really, you know, next level conversations about crazy stuff. That isn't just, you know, how many units are you hoping to sell of your next single, and, you know, did you rock hard, you know? Yeah, and so I was fascinated by these sort of young people who learned stuff. And so once Supergroove exploded, I thought, why don't I actually try going to university? Something I never thought I'd do, and I just loved it as soon as I got there. And yeah, I just took whatever papers interested me, you know. So I was just this music industry person, like having fun playing in the university. So no career plan at all. And I did classics and I did tons of philosophy, and yeah, loved it so much I started getting good marks and eventually scholarships and things. And then by the time finishing up in England, I was starting to feel like music was something I needed in my life, you know, as much as I enjoyed the silence of libraries for 10 years. But what I found is that when I came back to music, I did some bands and things like that, and it was great fun. But I had a much better understanding of storytelling, and having done all those random university papers and read stuff independently, and just become interested in art and story and all that sort of stuff, I was there was a much greater possibility for me to be a useful collaborator in the telling of stories. You know, when I was young, I was just music guy. All I cared about was music. How much reverb is there? What's the EQ? What's the preamps? You know, is the riff big enough? You know, should we use the open E string? Is that synth? Should it be a sawtooth wave? You know, that was my language I spoke. And after, as an older person coming back into it, I was much more able to have a conversation with these filmmakers about characters and arcs and motivations and, you know, the aesthetic and the tone, and I cared about all that stuff. You know, it was a genuine thing. So I guess that's the short answer is I totally didn't have a career plan. I just followed my heart, I suppose, but it led me full circle back into music to picture. I had to take this really long path before I could really have something of real value to offer, I think, to some extent.
Sure. And as you so you didn't have any training in terms of how to, because I'm asked constantly by up and coming sort of, you know, composers, often who have come out of university or out of some sort of, you know, mains class or whatever, you know, how you write to picture. What's your process? Have you figured out a process that you pretty much use for every project now? How has that sort of taken shape, I guess, for you? Everybody works differently.
Well, every project uses music differently, I think. So it's not just the case that every story has its own sound, and that certainly is the case, but it has its own way that music functions. So it might be underscoring the whole thing, and, you know, like a Marvel film, you know what I mean? That's just music wall to wall. Maybe there's a 4-second break, and then the next cue comes in.
Some other thundering bloody thing, you know.
Yeah. Or it might be there's just like 6 cues in the whole film, and they act, and all the sound effects go down, and it's just full music, and they act as like these big curtains for the different acts, you know. And so that intention will affect how I proceed with making the music. But very often what I like to do is start making music early. So really start to build up what I think is a potential sound world before they're even filming, sometimes months before they're filming. And if you're going to do that, you have to know it may all just get chucked in the bin, you know. But I really value that as a process, because as soon as the pictures start coming through, both the editor and me and the director can all start just trying stuff, you know, and experimenting and collaging. And so we've got these sort of raw materials to play with. And I find that a really fruitful process.
Are these with directors that you worked with before? Like, I mean, you must have some repeating directors that you keep, you work on each film that they do, or a bit of everything.
Well, in New Zealand, most directors are first time directors. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I have been lucky to work with people multiple times, and yeah, then that sort of gets baked into the process. How we worked last time, will affect how we work this time. Who the editor is makes a big difference too, because they're the ones often who are like responsible for heaving music against picture. And yeah, so that's an interesting collaboration that affects things a lot.
Do you mix everything yourself, or it kind of varies on the project, or or you just give it to the editor, or the
I mix all the music myself.
Right.
To me, the sound, I'm super fussy with. I would love to work with a mixer. Often there isn't the money, and also coupled with I'm really fussy with the sound. Yeah, so things like reverbs, distortions.
So you'll give a full mix of the cue or whatever and expect that it's going to be largely treated like that in the mix, or
I'll give stems, but not stems of every single thing.
Sure.
But with that in mind, I attend the mix. So if there's an issue with the cowbell or something, there's too much cowbell, then I'm there to separate out that percussion stem and ditch the cowbell. Okay. But it's sort of part of the service is to kind of make sure that all goes off without a hitch and is sounding good. Yeah, but I don't like to give complete full stems, just because sometimes crazy last minute decisions can get made in the mix,
or just mistakes, and they just
or just
whole sections of things.
Yeah, that's right, and things that I want each stem to work musically. Basically, I want it to be the case that if they say let's just have the percussion stem, then that sounds cool.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than if they take out something that's holding the whole groove together or something. You're like,
yeah, and I've heard stories about things moving by a 16th, a percussion stem for some reason, and no one spots it until the composer goes to the movies, and so I think it's an important part of the process to just be there to quality control that everything I've done is right and everything how it's been handled by those who come after me is right. It's just part of it.
Do you get pushback from any directors saying they don't want you sitting in the mix?
I usually say, look, I'm just going to be, I'll just come in, briefly, and have a screening, and don't worry, I won't have freaky notes, Yeah, but it's become something that they usually want me to do. Yeah, I think that, but by that stage, hopefully you've proven what sort of a collaborator you are. They definitely don't want someone who's just going to be in there saying, I think the music should be louder. It should be louder,
Well, there's nothing more tedious than that.
No, and because that's, there's no place for ego in this sort of work, I think. It's all in the service of the story, every instrument, every note. So I'm often saying, turn the music down. And then occasionally on key moments, it's like, I think you could be getting more out of the music here, but there's also a highly skilled mixer doing the mixing. And so that's a dialogue, it's about, do you think we could get more out of the music here? And, how about if we push this stem a little bit? And that's sometimes something I think, should I have spotted that, before the mix, that stem needed a push. But it can be hard without hearing the sound effects that have come in afterwards to spot some of those real tiny details. But I love the process of filmmaking because of all of that. You're just finessing and just getting it down to the nth degree and making it as great as it can possibly be.
Sure. But along the way, I'm interested in how people respond to this question. How do you deal with disconnecting the fact that you're basically delivering? You have to deliver what the director or the client wants, essentially, don't you? I mean, it's their story, not yours. How do you emotionally disconnect from when you have to kill your babies, as they say in the film world? You know.
Well, that is that no ego thing. I guess the two ways I do it is one is just not seeing it as a reflection of. I guess when I get into trouble is when I start feeling like it's people's opinion of me. You know what I mean? If they're slow in paying their invoice, or if they're, you know, beating me down on the contract, or not replying to emails, or rejecting queues. I mean, you get a lot of this stuff
every day. It's sort of
that's right. And I have to remind myself not to be egotistical about that, and not to go, oh, they should be showing me more respect. You know, it's just people are busy, and people might not like the piece of music I did, you know, and that has to be allowed, right? You know, that's them doing their job, you know. And so I just try and put myself outside of it and just think about the process and the work. And the other thing is with notes, critical notes, and when they don't like stuff, what I've found very helpful is thinking, okay, that's an opportunity for me to make it something better, or for me to make that cue better. I think the real problem for me, at least, is when I see the notes process and the feedback process as sort of taking away from the goodness of what's been made. You know, you should never, in my opinion, honor a note by making a composition less good. You know, you should always find a way to both honor the note and improve what you've done. So use the note as an opportunity to enhance it. That can be very difficult when you're at like version 12 of something.
You've lost all to live.
It's been rejected and changed, and then it's like some random note comes in that's totally contradictory from some other you know, sort of stakeholder in the project. And it can really start to feel like a narrow window. It's like, how can I possibly honor all these other notes and make this better and still honor that note? But that's a very big part of the challenge of the work and what one is doing every day, I think.
But dealing with constant critical response really is what we. It's like, I mean, from when I was a top artist, you just, and even now, it's just every day somebody is rejecting my work or saying, no, this is terrible, and then the next day, this is great, this is terrible. So yeah, keeping yourself. So do you have any kind of a general ways of keeping sane and healthy, I guess, in terms, mostly, you know, in terms of like working in this is a really strange industry that is a bit shapeless, formless. You're working by yourself. There's very little support in many ways. Or of course now we have this amazing guild, but aside from that, that's starting. Plug there. How do you? Do you have any sort of ways of just keeping yourself in balance, like, or keeping yourself healthy?
I think, well, I can't really claim to be either healthy or in balance, but I guess to the extent that I am, having studied those and read the philosophy stuff actually does actually literally help, like just trying to keep things in perspective. You know, because some days it can be very, you know, I mean, I've had this more than once of, you know, waking up at like 4 a.m. to get some cue in for them to listen to by, you know, 9 a.m. or something. And then it's like, deliver the cue, go upstairs, put the kettle on, ping, oh, I've got an email, oh, they're not feeling it. Oh. So it's been rejected before you've even had a chance to like, got that one out the door. And that is definitely a challenge. But I guess having more than one project on the go is actually helpful. So if you get a real disastrous emotional day on one project,
file that for the
going, well, I'm going to start work on this other thing and do some composing of, you know, that I think is important. And failing that, having some of your own music, that I find that really helpful. It's just like, I'm going to take a day off and I'm just going to make my own crazy random
Oh, for the joy, just for the joy of making it.
Absolutely. You know, the other day I spent the whole day, it turned into playing this really old medieval melody that I learned. And some of those medieval sort of Gregorian melodies are really counterintuitive to our musical sensibility. And I sort of learned it on the piano, and then I like tried playing it on this big tenor recorder that I can hardly play, and played it on the cello a bit, and then like put the loop pedal on, and
those nice melodies. Yeah,
exactly. Sampled some old Air Force documentary from the Second World War and had that going through an old ghetto blaster speaker, and so you know, just going full crazy. And it was good. And the next day I could sit down to my work, and yeah, it was all sort of back in perspective again. So yeah, that really helps.
I think also, perhaps, I mean, speaking for myself, as I've got older, I've felt more confident, and I guess I try to take things less personally as well. And
absolutely,
and every day is a new day, isn't it? As you just sort of said, you kind of, some days everything seems impossible and you're pushing stuff uphill and everybody hates everything you're doing, and then you wake up the next day, nothing's changed other than your attitude.
Yeah, that's right. It's huge, your own attitude. I find watching films also really helps, because that reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, when I watch a good film that I really love, I just feel so lucky to be involved with this process, you know. So instead of feeling like it's all emails and, you know, all these sort of powerful players and their opinions, it's like actually what we're doing is something intrinsically worthwhile and really cool, and I'm really lucky to be a part of it. And yeah, that I find inspires me again to find those solutions and ways forward.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic way of looking at things today. Maybe you might feel differently tomorrow. Who knows? I guess, how are you feeling about the industry at large, or I mean, even if you want to talk about how things are going for you at the moment? I mean, I know it's been a shitty couple of years for the planet. So, I mean, what are your feelings for, like, how's it been for you the last couple of years, and how do you feel about the future?
Well, I mean, for me, it's been pretty tough, but we've survived. But like the first half of this year was really, there was talk about jobs, but nothing was actually hitting the ground and, you know, getting paid. And yeah, it was a big hole like I haven't had for years, you know. So that was definitely concerning. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely challenges with the way the industry is going at the moment. There's the erosion of rights, you know, like producers starting to want, you know, copyright IP where composers would normally get royalties from. And I don't think they quite understand, or maybe they do and they don't care or whatever, but that's how we survive, you know. That's literally how I buy groceries, is those royalty payments. And if I can't buy groceries, then this isn't a sustainable career. And so when that rights erosion is coupled with budgets dropping or being pushed down, which is also happening a bit, it comes to a point where it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And that's a real problem. And the other problem is the level of competition. There's just so many people so keen to get their foot in the door with this as a career option. And I think perhaps not fully cognizant of how niche a career this is. You know, it's like being a special effects makeup artist or something. You know? I mean, it is like there is a small number of people that are able to make a living out of this. And I think it's been a little bit blown out of proportion as a career, because there's a very healthy industry in selling, you know, software synths and sample libraries and stuff. And so you're holding up these few people who are, you know, practicing screen composers as a, you know, career path, can sell a lot of samples to a lot of, you know, people who are excited, and rightly excited by that as a pastime and as possibly a way of making a living. But that does make it, actually, it puts more pressure on the people who are struggling to make a living out of that work, because there's so many people who would do it for peanuts, and, yeah, they'll sign away all their rights at the drop of a hat, and it just sort of puts the squeeze on. So, and I guess a third thing is you know, it's in terms of the industry at large, you know, diversity is a huge issue in screen composition, and I think that's something that to the extent that we composers have power in that conversation, we should be using it to improve that, you know. And the reason I say to the extent that we have that power is that it's also important for us to be aware that we don't have that much power in deciding who gets to work on a film, for instance. You know, I'm not part of that decision until they have decided that it's me, and then I'm like, oh yes, please.
Yeah.
So there's another conversation that needs to be had, you know, in the film industry about more diversity amongst composers. You know, yeah. So they need to be working on that, and we need to be working on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. No. Absolutely. I hear that. I say two white men interviewing each other. You know.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. But I mean, I think it would be a mistake to think, you know, because of how we look or whatever, that's something that we should not be on board with. You know what I mean? I think it's really important to, improve that. And yeah, we are absolutely part of the problem, and so we have to be part of the solution too. You know?
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. So are there any, as we wrap things up, any projects you're working on at the moment you're particularly excited by, or anything coming up?
On screen now is The Justice of Bunny King, which was a really great project to work on, really fun, and great film.
And in your hometown, or part of it was.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The film, the sort of climax of the film happens in Thames. And so that's fun. That's where I live. And Juniper, which I also helped out on. That wasn't my score, but yeah, I contributed, helping Marlon Williams and Merck with their score. And then I've done a couple of collaborations recently. One with Rob Thorne, the Aotearoa artist, and that was really special. And now I'm just embarking on another collaboration with Hohepa Tamehana, and that is really amazing too. He's such a incredible songwriter and just sort of artist. So, and knowledgeable. He's a professor as well. So like, it's really a thrill to be working with those guys on some short projects. So that's
some light relief between heavy film scores. It sounds.
Yeah, that's right. And then there's a couple of other things that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about. But you know, you sign all those contracts. I
don't believe it until the money's in my bank. But
tell me about it. Maybe that's why they get you to sign the contracts.
Probably. Do you? And before, as we finish, is there who's your favourite philosopher, or do you have as a PhD student, you must have a choice quote you can leave us with to put you on the spot?
Well, I think this one particularly applies to all artists. You know, and this is not a lofty philosophical quote. This is just the sort of thing you hear every day. But you know, be yourself. Everyone else is taken. You know, is I think incredibly important for artists, and especially, well, not least screen composers. You know what I mean? It's like Hans Zimmer is taken. You know,
Hans Zimmer takes everything.
Cliff Martinez is taken, and Mika Levy is taken, and you know, all these artists have made their careers by doing their own thing and doing it so well. You know, Olafur Arnolds and Johan Johansson. You know, and I think partly because of you know, the sale of samples and packs and stuff like that, we all get the same tools to sound like these stars, you know, and so it becomes quite a concerted effort to find one's own voice and one's own perspective, and I think that is a really important and crucial process in becoming any sort of artist. I mean, it's the whole name of the game. But
finding
yeah,
your own voice. Finding
yeah.
your own voice. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us today from live from Thames Coromandel.
No worries. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for talking with me.